My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the match. It was our 7th anniversary, and I was doing the one thing my husband had asked me never to do on that night. 6 years I had kept it. 6 years I had thought it was sweet. A small promise between two people who loved each other quietly, the way we were taught to love. I was 59 years old, and I had never once broken a word I gave him. But that year something in me had gone quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, emptied. And standing there in the dark, I understood that keeping the rule had cost me something I couldn't name yet. Before I go on, let me sit with you a minute. My name is Rebecca, and for most of my life I lived plain. A wife in an Amish home, in a marriage that looked, from the outside, like a good and settled thing. In many ways it was. If you've ever kept a promise so long you forgot to ask what it was really doing to you, then you already understand this story better than I did back then. Stay with me. Subscribe if these quiet stories reach you, and leave a comment when something lands. It helps more women find their way here. And tell me one thing while it's fresh. What's a rule someone once gave you for love that you never dared to question? I'll be reading. Now let me take you back. The rule was simple, and that was the trouble with it. On the night of our anniversary, every year, I was not to light the good lamp, the tall brass one his mother had passed down, the one that sat on the shelf above the stairs, and threw a warm gold circle across the whole front room. That night we used the small lamp only, the plain one. He said the low light was for us, for remembering, for keeping the evening soft and close. And for 6 years I believed that was all it was. I set out the small lamp without a thought, the way you set a table. But this 7th year, my hands were on the brass one. I had carried it down from the shelf while he was still at the barn, and I had set it on the kitchen table, where the light would be biggest, and I was standing over it with a match, and I could not make myself strike it, and I could not make myself put it back. That is where the story really starts. Not in some dramatic leaving, not in a fight, but in a plain kitchen with a matchbox in my hand, and my heart going like a bird against a window. I want you to picture that stillness, because the whole of it lives there. I should tell you what kind of man he was, because if you think this is a story about a cruel husband, you'll have the wrong story, and you'll judge him too fast. Faster than I ever could. He was gentle. He rose before light and never complained. He warmed my side of the bed with the flat iron in January without being asked. When my mother was dying, he sat with her 3 nights running so I could sleep, and he sang low to her in Deutsch though he had no voice for singing. I loved him. I want that on the record before anything else, because it's the part that makes the rest so hard to carry. We married in the fall, in the cool weeks after harvest, when the corn was in, and the evenings came early. I was young and glad of him. The first anniversary he came in from the fields with his hands washed and his hair still wet at the collar, and he set the small lamp between us, and he took both my hands across the table, and he said, "This one only, on this night, always," and he smiled when he said it. It sounded like a secret we were keeping together, a tenderness, something ours. I said yes the way you say yes to a man you trust with your whole body and your whole life. I didn't ask why. You didn't. Where I came from, a woman who asked why was a woman who'd already half decided to be trouble. So I kept it. I got good at keeping it. I want you to understand how a rule like that sinks into you until it stops feeling like a rule at all and starts feeling like weather, just the way the world is. Just how anniversaries are done. The 2nd year I set the small lamp without being told. The 3rd year I'd have felt strange doing anything else. By the 5th year I had folded the whole thing so deep inside myself that if you'd asked me was there a rule in my marriage, I'd have laughed and said no. We're happy, we don't need rules. That is the thing about a fence you've stopped seeing. You'll swear on your life you're standing in an open field. There were other things I set down beside that lamp over the years. Small things. The way you'd set down parcels you don't remember picking up. The letter from my cousin in Ohio, I didn't answer because he preferred I keep to home. the green fabric I wanted for a dress and put back because he said gray suited me better, and it did. He was right. Gray did suit me. None of it felt like losing anything. It felt like being a good wife, and I was proud of that. Prouder than I've ever been of anything, and I need you to believe I mean that with my whole heart even now. I'll tell you exactly what the rule was hiding, and I'll tell you what I did with that brass lamp on the table, and what he said when he came in from the barn and saw the match in my hand. But none of that will land right if you don't first understand why. Why a soft-spoken man asks his wife to keep one room dim on the one night a year that's supposed to be theirs. Because it wasn't about the lamp. It took me 30 years and a stranger's plain words to learn what it was really about. And I'm still not sure I've forgiven myself for how long the answer took. So let me go back to the beginning of it, to the way he asked, and the woman who'd told me, years before, that all the wives kept a rule like mine, and none of them said why. That's where the ground first shifted under me, though I didn't feel it move at the time. To understand why my hands were shaking over that match, you have to know how he asked me, and who else, all around me, had been asked the very same thing. His mother was still living when we married, a small, hard woman, with hands like dried apples, and it was her lamp. That fact matters more than I knew. She gave it to us the week of the wedding, wrapped in a feed sack, and she set it on the shelf above the stairs herself, up on her toes, and she looked at it a long moment before she came down. I thought it was sentiment, a mother parting with a thing she loved. Now I think she was setting a watch over us, the way you'd set a lantern in a window, and I think she knew exactly what she was leaving in my house, and exactly what it would ask of me. That first year I met an older woman at a quilting. I'll call her Miriam, though that wasn't her name, and I'll keep her that way out of respect for the dead. She'd been married near 40 years. We were sitting apart from the others, needling a border, and somehow the anniversary came up, and I said, proud as anything, how my husband and I kept the small lamp on our night. I expected her to smile. Instead, she went still. Her needle stopped in the cloth, and she said, "Lo, ours was the root cellar. We don't go down together on that night." And then she looked at me in a way I've never forgotten and said, "You don't ask. It's easier if you don't ask." I laughed it off. I thought she was a strange old woman with strange old ways, and that my rule was sweeter than hers, softer, more loving, a dim room instead of a shut cellar. I remember feeling almost sorry for her. Imagine that. Imagine being 22 and pitying a woman for the size of her cage, while you sit smiling in your own. I went home that night, and set the small lamp out early, glad of my gentle husband, glad of my soft little rule, and I did not think of Miriam's face again, for a very long time. That was my mistake, and it's the one I'd take back first. Here is what I want you to sit with, and it's the reason I'm telling this at all. All around me, in house after house, women were keeping rules like mine. One didn't sew after dark on a certain day. One never spoke her first husband's name. One kept a drawer she didn't open. We none of us called them rules. We called them our little ways, and we said it fondly, and we never once compared them out loud, because comparing would have meant asking, and asking, as Miriam said, was the thing that made it hard. If you've ever had a little way, you'd never say aloud to another soul, "You know already how soft the bars can be." Let me stop a moment, because I think some of you are sitting where I once sat. If any part of this is stirring something in you, a promise you kept so long you can't remember agreeing to it, I'd be grateful if you'd stay and subscribe, so these stories keep finding the women who need them. And tell me down below, what's your little way? The small thing you do, or don't do, that you've never explained to anyone. You don't have to say why. Most of us never learned the why. That's rather the point of the whole thing. So I kept my lamp, year on year, and I was happy. I truly was, and I won't let anyone tell me I wasn't, because the happiness was real, even if the ground under it was not. My husband was kind. The farm did well enough. We had no children, which was its own long grief. But he never once made me feel the lack was mine to carry, and God knows in our world he could have. On the small lamp nights he would take my hands across the table, same as the first year, and we'd sit in that low gold light, and I felt held. Chosen. I would not have traded it for any brighter room in the world. And yet, there was one thing I noticed, the way you notice a draft before you find the crack. On those nights, in that dim light, he would sometimes look past me, up toward the stairs, toward the shelf where the brass lamp sat dark. Just a flick of his eyes. Half a second, then back to me, and his hands warm on mine. I told myself it was nothing, a man's mind wandering after a long day. But it happened every year, that little glance up the stairs, and every year I pretended I hadn't caught it, because catching it would have meant asking, and I had learned so well, not to ask. It was the 7th year that the glance finally undid me, but not because of anything he did. It was because of what I found, and who put it in my hands, and the plain, terrible sentence a stranger said to me on a porch in the rain, that turned my whole soft marriage inside out like a wet coat. I'd spent 6 years not asking. In the 7th, the asking came, and found me on its own, uninvited, and once it had me I could not set it down. That's where I have to take you next. To the afternoon everything I thought I understood about that lamp turned out to be the smallest part of the truth. It was the spring of our 7th year that his mother died, and clearing her house is where it started. I was folding linens in her back room, alone, when I found the box, a plain wooden thing pushed to the back of a low shelf, the kind of box a woman keeps buttons in. Inside were letters, tied with kitchen string, and a photograph, which startled me, because we did not keep photographs. It was old and browned and creased soft from handling. A young woman in it, seated, and a man standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder. The man was not my father-in-law, and the woman was not my husband's mother. I didn't understand it at first. I turned it over. On the back, in faded pencil, a name I didn't know, and a date long before my husband was born. I sat down on the cold floor of that back room, with the linen still in my lap, and I read the letters. And I want to be careful here because they are not fully mine to tell, but the shape of it was this. Before my father-in-law, there had been another man, a love, and something had happened, some leaving or losing, or shame the letters only circled and never named, the way our people always circled the hardest things, and after it, she had married quiet, and kept house, and never spoke of any of it again. I still didn't see it. I'm ashamed of how long I didn't see it. I sat there thinking, poor woman, poor old woman, carrying that all those years, the same soft pity I'd once felt for Miriam, and I very nearly put the box back and said nothing, because that is what I had trained myself to do with anything that asked a question of me. But there was a second thing folded in with the photograph, a slip of paper, and on it, in that same hard pencil, was a single line about the brass lamp, that it was to be kept dark on the anniversary night, so a man is not reminded of what a woman remembers. I read it 4 times, so a man is not reminded of what a woman remembers. And slowly, the way cold comes up through a floor, I understood. The lamp was not ours. The rule was not his. It had come down to him from her, and to her from somewhere further back still, and it was never about softness, or closeness, or a secret between 2 people in love. It was a fence around a woman's memory, a dark corner where the past was to be kept, so that on the one night a marriage looked back, it would look back only at the marriage, and never at the woman who existed before it. My gentle husband had handed me his mother's grief as if it were a gift, and I had thanked him for it, and kept it lit low for 6 years. I want to be fair, because fairness is the only thing that's kept me whole. He did not know. I am nearly certain he did not know. He had been handed the rule the way I was handed it, softly, lovingly, by someone he trusted, on a night that felt like tenderness, And he had never asked why, because he was raised the same as me, in the same air, where asking why was the first crack toward trouble. He wasn't guarding my past. He didn't know I had one, and I hardly did, but that's just it. The rule didn't need me to have a past. It only needed me not to ask whether I was allowed one. It was never built for a person, it was built to be passed down. I tried to talk myself back into the old peace. I stood in that back room and I argued with myself like two women, and one of them said, "What does it matter? He's kind. You're happy. Put the box away. Keep your good life." And God help me, she made a strong case. Because it was a good life, and she wasn't lying. But the other one, the quiet, emptied one who'd been waking all that year, she just kept saying the plain sentence over. So a man is not reminded of what a woman remembers. And I couldn't get around it. Once you see the fence, you can't unsee it. You can climb back inside and stand very still, but you'll always know now that it's a fence and not the sky. The stranger's line came later, on the porch. A cousin's daughter had gone out among the English and come back to help clear the house, and she found me still holding that box, and I showed her the slip of paper because I had to show someone. She read it in the rainlight, and she was quiet a long while. Then she said, not unkindly, the plainest thing anyone had ever said to me, "Rebecca, they didn't take your memories away. They just made sure you'd never turn the light on to look for them." I have never been the same from the minute she said it. She didn't preach, she didn't rage. She just handed me back a door I hadn't known was mine to open. So now you know why my hands were shaking over that match. It wasn't rebellion, and it wasn't spite. It was the 7th anniversary, and the small lamp was sitting in its place where it always sat. And I had carried the tall brass one down from the shelf and set it on the table in the middle of everything. And I stood there understanding at last exactly what I would be turning on, and exactly what my whole marriage had quietly agreed I should never see by. He was still at the barn. I could hear his steps start across the yard, and I looked at the match, and I looked at the dark lamp, and I made the choice I'd spent 30 years being taught I didn't have. I struck the match. The whole front room went gold, brighter than that room had ever been on that night, brighter than his mother's night or her mother's before her, the light climbing the stairs and filling every dark corner they'd all kept shut. He came in and stood in the doorway with the cold still on him, and he saw the brass lamp lit, and he saw my face, and neither of us said a word for a long moment. Then his eyes went up the stairs, the old flick, toward the empty shelf, and this time they had nowhere to land. I lost some things that night, and I'll tell you honestly what they were and what they weren't, because the cost was real, and I won't pretend it away. But I want to leave you first with the thing I've carried longest. Any rule that needs the lights kept low was never given to you for love, no matter how gently the hands were that passed it down. It was given so you'd never see clearly enough to ask. And you are allowed to ask. You always were. It only ever took a match.